Chapter 1136 Grievance. Li Changgong listened to Jiang Han's words, and the corner of his mouth hooked into an icy arc the Jiangnan region could only send him, otherwise, there's no one else who can take the fight. Jiang Han whispered, "Big brother, do you really want to fight him?" Li Changgong pressed down on his long sword and said coldly, "He killed elder brother Lin and almost killed you. This kind of despicable and shameless fellow, I absolutely cannot let him go. As long as he appears here today, I'll be sure to ruthlessly clean him up." The old brother Lin that Li Changgong spoke of was none other than the White Tiger, one of the 4 spirits of the East Sea, whose real name was Lin Tianqi. Among the military, those who were able to hold high positions were not from prominent families. If it wasn't for the arrival of the end times, which allowed ordinary people to gain great power through mutation, I'm afraid that ordinary people like Zhang Yi and Black Tortoise wouldn't have had a chance to make a name for themselves at all. If you had great talent and you possessed a deep background, the probability of you becoming a human being would be 1,000,000 times higher than an ordinary person. Ordinary geniuses were easily buried, while geniuses with backgrounds were easily discovered. Li Changgong, Jiang Han, and Lim Tianqi were acquainted with each other when they were young because of their father's relationship, and their relationship was very shallow. When they grew up, they joined the army according to their father's arrangement. Li Changgong went to the northwest, while Jiang Han and Lin Tianqi went to the East Sea region to join the navy. Although these 3 were not biological brothers, they were better than biological brothers because of the bond they had cultivated since childhood in a very large yard. In the Battle of Star Island, the 2 regions as well as the Navy of Columbia suffered heavy losses, with more than half of the mutants killed in battle. White Tiger also died in the middle of that tragic war. After Li Changgong got this news, he blamed Zhang Yi for everything. If it wasn't for the stability of Huashu Kingdom, he probably would have rushed to Tianhai City to settle the score with Zhang Yi. Now that he easily had this opportunity to meet Zhang Yi, and it was still in Xinjing, an area far away from Tianhai City. Of course he would not miss the chance to avenge his brother and sister. Jiang Han frowned slightly and said to Li Changgong, "Big brother, you and that chaos fellow are both epsilons, being the pillars of Huashu Kingdom nowadays. A fight between you guys is not a good thing for the country." Li Changgong laughed coldly, "Don't worry, I know what's in my heart. I won't kill him, but I'll also make him suffer some pain and learn a point." He gripped the hilt of the sword in his hand, his gaze as sharp as lightning. "As a soldier, I'm going to let him know that backstabbing one's friend's army was a huge price to pay. This time was just a warning, if there's a next time, I'll definitely kill him myself." Jiang Han thought for a moment, then suddenly whispered, "But, he was not a soldier." Li Changgong was slightly stunned, then said coldly, "Times are tough, everyone is a soldier, how come he isn't?" Jiang Han didn't expect there to be this kind of argument, but since it was Li Changgong who said it, then it must be correct. Shang Daowen vaguely heard the conversation between the 2 from a distance. The 2 didn't turn their backs on him either, and although Shang Daowen didn't like eavesdropping, he still heard a little bit along the wind. "Ahem, Gochen, this time it was Xinjing that invited you here to discuss important matters. So I hope that you will give Xinjing face during this time and not strike out at anyone. Otherwise, we, as hosts, will not be able to sit back and do nothing." Shang Daowen said with a smirk, polite, without losing his majesty. Li Changgong narrowed his eyes at him. "If, for example, I challenge him and he responds to the battle, then isn't that all right?" Shang Daowen nodded with a smile. "If it was something that both of you approve of, we certainly have no problem with it." "Good." Li Changgong nodded. As long as Zhang Yi arrived, he naturally had a way to make Zhang Yi fight with him. "I will be here today, waiting for him to come over." As Li Changgong's words fell, his men carried out tables, chairs and shed parasol from amongst the airplanes and set them up right here at the airport. Li Changgong called out to Vermilion Bird to sit down, and one of the female officers under his command actually took out a heater on the spot and started to heat up a pot of Great Northwest Fen wine. "Mr. Shang, come over and sit down for a while. There's a good show to watch later," Li Changgong said to Shang Daowen. Shang Daowen smiled faintly, "I don't need to." But Mr. Gochen, please call me Geocache. Li Changgong snorted with some disdain. You guys, you really were used to being one-dimensional. It's obvious that you were already Epsilon, but you still talk about so many bullshit rules. The two men were not strangers, both having hung out in the capital circle and not having dealt with each other much. Shang Daowen smiled deeply. There are no rules. I think it is better to know the rules, lest there be any accidents. As he finished his sentence, his gaze drifted into the distance. In the north of Xinjiang, that large hall in the central area, it was as if something was watching the entire Xinjiang. Li Changgong and the others did not have to wait long. Zhang Yi and his group arrived in Xinjiang very quickly, and the F-37, the newest type of jet airplane, was really not something to sneeze at. There were no wings, but the flight speed was amazingly fast, and the distance of more than 1,000 kilometers only took half an hour. Arriving in the northern country, Zhang Yi lifted his head from above Zhou Qir's knees and looked out the window. Through the window, the huge and ancient imperial city could be seen. The airplane quickly landed at the airport. Zhang Yi didn't consider anything else, but just called out to the crowd to go down with him. The big guys were full of anticipation. After all, after the end of the world, it wasn't easy to want to travel to the distant north. However, Zhou Qir still carefully urged everyone not to just think about playing. After all, this time, she was mainly accompanying Zhang Yi to attend the meeting. No one was sure what the Xinjiang region was like, so don't stir up trouble. Deng Shintong walked over. Captain Chaos, let's go. Zhang Yi nodded lazily. Let's go. The door of the cabin opened and they walked out of the doors along the gangway. Zhang Yi immediately felt countless gazes converge on him. A few of these gazes were particularly sharp and caught Zhang Yi's attention at once. An elegant officer leading a group of Dragon's Roar Guardians was waiting for them with a smile right in front of the airplane. However, not far away, there were two other gazes that caught Zhang Yi's attention even more. At such a freezing cold time of the year, if anyone would set up tables and chairs near the huge airport and leisurely drink, it was naturally very noticeable. Zhang Yi saw Jiang Han and also the man next to her with a murderous aura. And Li Changgong glanced back at Zhang Yi. The domineering aura was leaking out. This was Zhang Yi's most intuitive feeling. That man was like a long sword out of its sheath, giving off a feeling of being sharp and not easy to approach. His eyes made Zhang Yi very uncomfortable. It was not the usual scrutinizing eyes, but rather, it was with a distinct hostility and even a hint of contempt. Eh? Who was he? Zhang Yi asked Deng Shintong beside him. Deng Shintong was also stunned for a moment when he saw Li Changgong, then said, "Why is he here?" Amidst Zhang Yi's puzzled gaze, Deng Shintong briefly introduced Zhang Yi. He was Northwest King Li Changgong, the #1 powerhouse of the Northwest region, Epsilon Realm. At the same time, he was also the Supreme Commander of the Northwest region. I originally thought that as Supreme Commander, he would have excused himself from this gathering. But I didn't expect, that he would personally come here. It seems like this rally really isn't simple. Chapter 1137 Lips and Swords. Zhang Yi couldn't help but raise an eyebrow after hearing Li Changgong's identity. #1 Expert, Supreme Commander. When these two identities were concentrated in one person's body, it signified that the Northwest region must have experienced a change in power. This did not come as a surprise. If he or Black Tortoise had this kind of idea, they would have the same chance to become the region's commander. It was just that neither of them were willing to do that. Managing a large region was no easy task, and there was no telling how many troubles one would need to face every day. Since Li Changgong was able to rise to the top, it didn't just show that he was strong, it also showed that he was sufficiently confident in his ability to command. He can balance external crusades with managing internal affairs. Northwest, Li family. These keywords caused an ancient monarch to appear in the center of Zhang Yi's mind. However, he quickly pushed the thought out of his mind. When he saw Jiang Han, as well as Li Changgong's unfriendly look, he realized what was going on. It looks like he was trying to stand up for the people of the East Sea region. To retaliate for the setup I set up on Star Island? Zhang Yi quickly figured this out. He remained silent and slowly walked down the gangway. Jiangnan region, chaos. Xinjing, geocache. Shang Daowen smiled and said, Chaos's name is as loud as thunder, and I've always wanted to meet him in person. When I see it today, it really lives up to its name. 3 epsilons had already appeared today, which had already reached Qin Qigong's ideal number. If today's meeting was able to reach a perfect agreement, then it was a great good for the entire Xinjing region, as well as the entire Huaxu kingdom. Your Excellencies have traveled a long way. We have already prepared guest rooms, so a few of you can take a rest first. Tonight, our commander will personally host a banquet for all of you. Zhang Yi nodded, but his gaze crossed over him and landed on Li Changgong's body. This was because at this moment, Li Changgong had already grown up, his military boots stepping on the hard pavement as he walked towards the side. You were Jiangnan region's chaos, the guy who backstabbed his allies and victimized many people? As soon as Li Changgong walked over, there was a strong flavor of gunpowder among his icy tone. Shang Daowen introduced Zhang Yi. This is the Northwest region's Gochin, Mr. Chaos, although I don't know what kind of conflict there is between you two. But if you find it troublesome today, I will step in and help mediate between you. Li Changgong walked over in large strides, his left hand pressing down on his saber, his sharp eyes bursting with intense battle intent. He suddenly blurted out, pitfalling an ally and killing a number of generals was disloyal. Concealing information that led to the tragic deaths of many people in Jiangnan region, and Jiangnan region being at odds with East Sea region, was unrighteous. And yet he was able to get away with it due to his strong force. It was simply the shame of Huaxu kingdom. Li Changgong loudly counted Zhang Yi's sins, then sternly shouted, in order to right the wrongs of Huaxu kingdom and avenge the deaths of my comrades, I'm going to duel with you today. Chaos, do you dare to take it? Li Changgong's words caused the people present to change their faces. There were quite a few people on this side of the airport. Shang Daowen had brought quite a few important officials from Xinjing in order to express the importance of Xinjing region to the honored guests from other regions, and the Dragon's Roar Guardians who were responsible for holding up the scene alone were as high as a few hundred. Not to mention that at this time, the representatives of the Northwest region, East Sea region, and Jiangnan region were also present. Li Changgong's words were unforgiving, branding Zhang Yi as a disloyal and unrighteous person. At a time like this, if Zhang Yi took half a step back, then he would soon become the laughing stock of the entire Huaxu kingdom. Shang Daowen couldn't help but glance at Li Changgong and thought, no wonder you were so sure that Chaos would definitely duel with you, so you did it so desperately. He sighed in his heart and kept an eye on Zhang Yi's reaction, avoiding a violent clash between the two. In case there were casualties from the fight, it would be a big trouble. On Zhang Yi's side, he slowly narrowed his eyes, and a touch of coldness swept through his eyes. Of course, he understood that the person in front of him was trying to force him to fight. Behind him, Zhou Qi and the others were also furious, only that they knew better and did not raise their voices at this moment. Because Zhang Yi was needed to face Li Changgong right now, if they opened their mouths to speak, it would only appear that Zhang Yi, the Jiangnan region's #1 combatant, didn't know how to discipline the people underneath him. Li Changgong coldly looked at Zhang Yi and continued to ask, Chaos, do you dare to take it? The corners of Zhang Yi's mouth hooked up as a touch of mockery surfaced in his eyes. You? Also worthy? He contemptuously pointed at Li Changgong and shouted in a loud voice, you're only 40 years old, yet you've become the commander of the Northwest region. I heard that the Northwest region commander before you was called Luo Yunfeng, a highly respected old general. You don't have enough seniority or ability to seize the position of commander by force. This is disloyalty. The Xinjing region convened the 6 regions to discuss important matters. This was for the future development of Huaxu kingdom. The fate of the nation was at stake. To come and disrupt at a time like this, disregarding the world, this is unkindness. I laid out on Star Island, causing Huaxu kingdom's greatest enemy, the greatest obstacle to going out to sea, the Columbus Ocean fleet to be damaged by more than half, and the Lord of the Ocean, Cardalus to be seriously injured, and unable to threaten the southeastern waters of my Huaxu kingdom in a short period of time. You keep your mouth shut about such a major feat and only know how to calculate losses. This was clearly jealous of the merits I've made, yet you still have to throw dirty water. It was unrighteous to ignore the facts. Speaking here, Zhang Yi paused and said quietly, I also heard that your mother had another love and was ready to remarry, but you repeatedly blocked it. This was unfiliality. An unfaithful, unfilial, unkind, and unrighteous piece of cargo like you has the face to challenge me. Are you worthy? Zhang Yi's words were like a heavy bomb dropping into the scene, directly causing everyone to quake inside. The first few items were just calmly listened to by the crowd, but the last item made everyone look at Li Changgong with strange eyes. Everyone didn't know that the Li family had such a complicated story. Because according to the age, Li Changgong's mother was already close to 60 years old, and it was unthinkable that an old tree could blossom and burst into a second spring. Of course, that last thing was just Zhang Yi's nonsense. He didn't know Li Changgong at all, let alone knowing Li Changgong's parents. But this kind of thing, like rumors, didn't need much evidence in the first place. As Zhang Yi was one of the several epsilon-level powerhouses in Huashu Kingdom, as long as something came out of his mouth, someone would naturally believe it and spread it widely. He wouldn't fight Li Changgong without knowing anything about him. But to compete with him in cursing, I'm sorry, but how could a noble gentleman like Li Changgong outplay Zhang Yi, who was from the marketplace? Li Changgong himself could not have imagined that Zhang Yi dangling epsilon would be so sprayed, and in the end, he even mentioned his mother. All of a sudden, his eyes erupted with an incomparably strong killing aura. Clang! He drew the long sword in his hand and pointed it straight at Zhang Yi. You seek death. Chapter 1138 Rumor A Mouth. Zhang Yi's words directly broke Li Changgong's defense. It was mainly the last sentence that had too much killing power. He did not expect Zhang Yi to come up with such a move. Zhang Yi had used his method to heavily give him a counterattack. If his previous heckling of Zhang Yi was grandiose and stood for the greater good, then Zhang Yi's roguelike statement later on was pure nonsense. But as it happened, most people in this world were not very interested in that kind of crowning statement. People prefer to listen to gossip. Especially listening to the gossip of those who are in high positions of power and fame. Even that one sentence made many people not care much about what Zhang Yi had actually done, and only wanted to hear how Li Changgong's mother was old and glowing in her second spring. Li Changgong drew the long sword in his hand and pointed it straight at Zhang Yi, and behind him, the generals of the northwest region also drew their weapons, and at once, the entire airport was filled with a murderous aura. Zhang Yi's eyes were flickering, and before he spoke, he used everything follows the trail to lock Li Changgong at the first time, and unfolded everything under heaven, around all of them to avoid Li Changgong from launching an attack. But just at this time, Shang Daowen walked slowly and blocked the middle of the two. Go Chen, I've said it before. If the two of you in chaos agree to settle their personal grudges privately, I won't stand in the way. But whoever wants to cause trouble in Xinjiang, I will have to step in. Zhang Yi saw this and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Xinjiang region was Xinjiang region and would not let anyone provoke their authority at such a time. After all, they were the hosts. Zhang Yi smiled as he stood behind Shang Daowen and looked at Li Changgong without uttering a word. Li Changgong's face became extremely ugly. Zhang Yi refused to accept his request for a duel, and it was impossible for him to swear at Zhang Yi without any regard for his image. After all, Zhang Yi was just a commoner, and his style of doing things had always been focused on results, with no regard for fame. Zhang Yi was able to stand here and curse at him without any concern for his image. But he couldn't, he was the son of a family, and now he was the supreme commander of the Northwest region. That would only make him a joke in the upper circles of Huashu Kingdom without gaining any benefits. Chaos, don't you dare to duel with me? Only dare to hide behind the Xinjiang region like a shrunken head turtle? Hee. Li Changgong deliberately mocked in a loud voice, trying to provoke Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi carried his hands behind his back and coldly grunted in disdain. A disloyal, unfilial, unkind and unrighteous person like you is also qualified to duel with me? I don't want to dirty my hands. Saying that, he let out a long sigh, there wouldn't really be someone who was bitten by a dog and bit back instead, right? No way, I was a man of honor. Li Changgong wanted to take advantage of the situation verbally, and was simply not clear about the situation. Zhang Yi continued, you might as well go home earlier if you have this time and ask your mother if what I said was true. Li Changgong, Zhang Yi, never lie. I'm telling you this truth, but it was also for the sake of your family's harmony. Zhang Yi spoke with conviction, and Li Changgong's grip on his sword became a little bit stronger. If he was not concerned about Shang Daowen and the experts in Xinjiang who had not yet appeared, he would have rushed up with his sword. These words came out of Zhang Yi's mouth. Even if he was talking nonsense, the people around him did not know why. What was Zhang Yi's status? Epsilon-level mutant, one of the top powerhouses in Huashu Kingdom. How could someone with this kind of status talk nonsense? The aura of a strong person, coupled with the lack of understanding of Zhang Yi, made many people take what Zhang Yi said at face value. Although it was inconvenient to say it in front of Li Changgong, everyone's eyes were burning with the fire of gossip. It was almost needless to think that after today, the entire Xinjiang would circulate the story of the Li family. Shang Daowen frowned. 2 Epsilon-level mutants, both of whom were the weight of the nation. What was it like to learn from a shrew here? He opened his mouth and said, the two of you should cut the crap. Since Chaos won't agree to a duel, you two should go back and rest first. When this matter is over, how to deal with this matter will be resolved by yourselves. Zhang Yi nodded. This of course, I will still give face to the Xinjiang region. After all, I was a person who knows how to be polite and won't mess around on other people's turf. Li Changgong gritted his teeth, killing intent filling his eyes, itching to eat Zhang Yi. Chaos. You damned fellow, you wait for me. If I don't teach you a lesson, I, Li Changgong, will take your name. Zhang Yi provocatively hooked his finger at him. I'll wait for you to come over. Zhang Yi, with the people around him, left the airport under the vicious gazes of those people from the northwest region and headed to the guest rooms that the Xinjiang region had prepared for them. As for Li Changgong, at this moment, he forced himself to hold back his anger, but he was only able to insert his sword into its sheath and angrily lead his people away. Seeing this scene, Jianhan shook her head helplessly. She had reminded Li Changgong that this Zhang Yi person was not the least bit of the so-called strongman demeanor. However, even though Li Changgong had been mentally prepared, he had not thought that Zhang Yi was even more rogue than he thought. Now, this is a big deal. Jianhan helplessly covered her forehead. She did hope that Li Changgong would help her teach Zhang Yi a good lesson. But Zhang Yi had spoken too harshly, and she was a little worried that Zhang Yi would be killed by Li Changgong. After all, Li Changgong was a chariot-level epsilon with a supernatural ability index as high as 16,000 points and a very terrifying land ability. This mess, let's see how you guys will end it subsequently. Jianhan did not forget the purpose of this trip in his mind, and after saying goodbye to Li Changgong, he still left with the people from the East Sea region. After they left, many of the staff at the scene immediately chatted privately. Hey, did you hear what Chaos just said about Go Chen? It's too explosive. I didn't expect things to be so exciting in Go Chen's family. Hey, what's so rare about that? In their circle, it wasn't common for them to play a little fancy. In the past, they were all playing in private, but now that Chaos has broken up their old ways, they'll be famous all over the world in the future. Zhang Yi led Deng Shintong and the others to the luxurious guest rooms prepared for them under the guidance of Dragon's Roar Guardians. On the way, Deng Shintong came over and said, "Man, you are really too ruthless this time. Hitting someone is still not hitting their face. You made fun of Li Changgong's old mom. I'm afraid he's going to play with you." Zhang Yi snorted coldly. I don't want to play that way either, but he wants to hit me in the face in public, so why should I be polite to him? Deng Shintong shook his head helplessly. But what you said was bad. You had to say his old mom. I can't imagine that you are so well informed and know about his family. I was underestimating you. Zhang Yi and the people around him all looked at Deng Shintong with shocked faces when they heard this. What? Zhang Yi scratched his head. I was just pissed off by him and got high off my mouth. And it really made me talk. Deng Shintong expressionlessly craned his neck and squinted at him. Marriages and families like theirs were all unions, and there wasn't much affection in themselves. You can't divorce after marriage out of interest, so you have to play your own game. The Li family's situation was originally not a secret in the circle. It's just that now, this secret has been picked apart by you. Man, you're in big trouble. Hearing this, Zhang Yi suddenly looked at Deng Shintong with an extremely odd look. Then your family. Deng Shintong said in disbelief, my parents have been divorced for more than 10 years, and I still have a Britannia stepfather. Zhang Yi was dumbfounded. Your heart is really big, you can just say this? Deng Shintong pointed at his nose and said with a smirk, I was educated abroad, so I look at this aspect more openly. But, a teasing look appeared in his eyes. Li Changgong was someone from a military family, and holds face extremely dear. You wait for him to play with your life. Chapter 1139 The Royal Mansion. After hearing Deng Shintong's words, Zhang Yi rubbed his brow as he felt troubled. Fatty Su snorted coldly at this time. It was clearly that fellow who bullied people too much. Our boss was just scolding him twice, which is considered polite. If we really fight, when our boss couldn't beat him. Zhang Yi's ability was a dual attribute of space and time. The ability of space attribute was known to many people. After all, this thing could not be hidden. But no outsider knew that he also possessed the time attribute. So not to mention that he hadn't lost under the same ability index. Even if he encountered a supernatural whose ability index was much higher than his, he could still be invincible. Zhang Yi glanced at Fatty Su, but said indifferently, Fatty, what do you think makes Li Changgong come over to me for a one-on-one fight? Fatty Su thought about it and said, to help his friend out. Zhang Yi, however, said, a character who can become a big shot on one side, although I can't say how shrewd he is, at least he wouldn't be a dumbass. Since he dares to come over and fight me one-on-one, he must just have plenty of backbone. Zhang Yi looked towards Deng Shintong. Regarding him, do you have any intelligence on your side? A flash of color flashed across Deng Shintong's eyes. In principle, the information of an epsilon-level mutant in a large region was a top secret, and it would be difficult for outsiders to obtain it. Zhang Yi laughed. In principle, it was one thing, but in reality, it's another. Your Teng family is so powerful, I don't believe that you can't get a bit of information. Deng Shintong rubbed his nose. Indeed. He said, he has traveled all the way, although unlike you, he has not had the experience of foreign conquests, but after all, he needs to rely on power to seek his current position. Therefore, more or less, some strength will still be displayed. The more reliable information, which I also got from my friend in Xinjiang, is that his present-day supernatural ability index is as high as 16,000 points. As for his ability, it seems to be based on close combat, but the details are unknown. Zhang Yi's gaze condensed slightly. 16,000 points was it? Deng Shintong said, it's better for you to try to avoid him now. After all, although you are also at chariot level, your supernatural ability index is only at 13,000 points, a huge gap between you and him. He's not a Cardalist that left the ocean. On land he was able to utilize 100% of his strength. Zhang Yi nodded. You're right, I'll try to stay away from him. Although Zhang Yi said this on his lips, his eyes became deep. Deng Shintong didn't know that Zhang Yi, nowadays, had already reached 15,000 points of his supernatural ability index. However, he would still be wary of Li Changgong. Li Changgong was giving the East Sea region a head start, and the East Sea region's side understood his abilities. There were only two types of people who could defeat Zhang Yi head-on. First, people whose strength exceeded him by too much. Second, people whose ability attributes were able to restrain Zhang Yi. If Li Changgong was the first kind, Zhang Yi wouldn't be worried. After all, he was also hiding his strength. As for the second kind, Zhang Yi hadn't encountered a mutant who was able to restrain his ability until now. Try not to clash with him, there is no need to take risks. But if he bites me and won't let go, then we'll have to do it. Zhang Yi's mind was set. What's more, he was now carrying a humanoid plug-in. Zhang Yi looked to the side at Spirit Guardian, who who was wearing a black combat uniform with his eyes covered by a black lace eye patch, and his heart was much more solid. It looked like he was a single person, but in reality, he could be a legion of mutants. If he really fought, he wouldn't talk about martial virtues with Li Changgong. There was only winning and losing inside his eyes. Zhou Jaime's eyes flashed with a touch of worry. Originally, she was quite looking forward to coming to Xinjing this time, hoping that she could go around. However, Zhang Yi encountered trouble as soon as he arrived. She was a sensible woman, her mouth would definitely not say anything, but her heart was just a little lost. This feeling of loss was present in most people's hearts, but they weren't children, and no one said anything. However, this feeling of loss was instantly swept away as they arrived at the guest room that Xinjing region had prepared for them. What Xinjing had prepared for them was not so much a guest room as it was a huge royal residence. As Xinjing was the imperial city of two dynasties, the ancient buildings within the city were relatively well preserved, and there was no shortage of mansions of the royal family and nobles. Especially some of the honorable royal residences, which often covered tens of thousands of square meters. There are also some courtyards built by people in later generations. The scale and degree of luxury is not inferior to the ancients. After the end of the world, Xinjing's buildings were still well preserved, which was the heritage of being the capital city. In the courtyard, there were carved beams and paintings, and there were even some mutated cold-resistant plants that had been cultivated into ornamental plants and planted all over the courtyard. Chapter 1140 Liang Yan. Li Changgong's appearance had originally disturbed the crowd's excitement of traveling in Xinjing. But after coming to this huge manor, their thoughts changed instantly. Because of this huge manor, they want to visit once at least. We'll have to spend a week, and inside the carved beams and painted buildings, the landscape is very good. Zhou Jaime's eyes were filled with surprise. This place is so beautiful. At this time, a sweet voice came from behind. That was of course. Nowadays, the most beautiful scenery in the entire Xinjing has been relocated to various manors to protect them. This manor you see today, a part of the scenery inside was split from the several famous gardens in Xinjing at the beginning. The crowd followed the voice and saw a tall, beautifully shaped woman walk over. She was very tall, at least 1.78 m in appearance. This kind of height was hard to see in the south. On her body, she also had a martial aura that southern women did not have. Even if Liang Yu was in front of her, compared to her, there was a little bit of a birdie flavor. However, she was indeed very pretty, and in terms of face value, she was even able to compare herself to Zhou Qi and Yang Xia and the others. She walked over and introduced herself with a smile. Honorable Sir Chaos, and all of you from the Jiangnan region, my name is Liang Yan. I was the housekeeper sent by the higher-ups of the Xinjing region to entertain you all. For the next period of time, if you guys need anything, you can order me. There were hundreds of service personnel in the middle of this huge royal residence-like manor. It was evident of Xinjing's sincerity in entertaining them. However, when she saw Liang Yan, Zhou Qi subconsciously wrapped her arms around Zhang Yi, and Yang Xia also came to his side to declare her sovereignty. Because this woman in front of her was very beautiful, they didn't want Zhang Yi to have a womanizer outside. In fact, they had overthought it. Zhang Yi didn't need to guess to know that the person who could be arranged by Xinjing must have a special identity. He would never touch a rose with thorns. Thanks a lot, I'll trouble you for the next few days. Zhang Yi said. Liang Yang smiled and said, it was my honor. Liang Yang's gaze quickly skimmed over the crowd, stopping slightly when she passed Fatty Su. Because while the crowd was still enjoying the scenery of the manor, Fatty Su had long since pulled out a game console and played the game intently because he was bored with all this. This abruptness had the flavor of a chicken standing out from the crowd. Liang Yang withdrew her gaze and guided the crowd, introducing them to the history and scenery of the manor while receiving them to the residential area of the manor. After her introduction, the crowd knew that this was not a real royal residence. After all, the real royal residence was a historical relic, so the buildings had to be preserved, but instead, it was not comfortable enough to live in. The new style manor, on the other hand, was one that retained some of the ancient features while adding many modernized elements. Therefore living in it was more in line with the habits of modern people. Zhang Yi arrived in the middle of a luxurious villa and dismissed the other people around them. When Zhang Yi and his team were the only ones in the house, Zhang Yi asked Yang Xinxin and Lu Karen to check if there was any surveillance equipment. Yang Xinxin opened the computer. Lu Karen also took out the special anti-surveillance equipment from his body, and after some checking, he confirmed that this place was not bugged by anyone. Zhang Yi stroked Flower's head next to him. Flower, once someone approaches within 20 meters of this house, immediately warn them, understand? Meow. Flower lazily raised her head and howled before continuing to lower her head to sleep. However, it appeared to be sleeping, but it would be the first to notice any breeze around it. Only after doing enough homework did Zhang Yi lie down on the sofa and discuss with the crowd on how to deal with the trouble Li Changgong had brought. Things in Xinjiang aren't over yet, and here comes another Li Changgong. I can't imagine that I just arrived in Xinjiang and trouble is coming to my door. What a headache. Zhang Yi rubbed his temples and laughed with a helpless expression. Yang Xinxin took a sip of hot coffee and slowly said, "It's all fate. Brother, you set up so many people in Star Island, it's impossible for that incident to end without a word." Zhang Yi was indifferent. "I know. The big deal is that I will take you guys with me and leave at that time. Anyway, after I return to Jiangnan region, that guy will always not dare to chase me to my territory to cause trouble." Deng Shintong laughed. "I also think that avoiding war was a good thing. After all, the current you is not his opponent. Endure for a while to calm the wind and waves, and take a step back to broaden the sky. Anyway, with your character, buddy, you don't care about face." Although Zhang Yi's words had left Li Changgong in a sorry state. However, it was also true that Li Changgong had invited Zhang Yi to fight in front of so many people from several regions. It was inevitable that he would be perceived as a weakness if he avoided the battle. Zhang Yi shrugged. "Let them think what they want, it's none of my business." Zhang Yi was not the type of person who would take risks for the sake of face. How much could face be worth? Deng Shintong crossed his legs and rubbed his slender fingers, but slowly said, "Things won't be that simple. If you don't respond to the battle, Li Changgong will find a way to force your hand. I've heard about that fellow. He was a man of ambition and means. This time he chose to duel you in Xinjiang. It was not an impulse. Avenging his brother's death was one aspect, and it was also his best reason. But establishing his authority by suppressing you was also his purpose. After all, a man who was less than 40 years old became the commander of the region purely based on his force and his father's connections. But in the Northwest region, there are definitely many hearts that are not convinced. The new official has 3 fires, and he was planning to burn this fire on you." Zhang Yi raised his head and glanced at Deng Shintong, and thought to himself, worthy of being someone from a big family, there are 100 hearts and minds in their hearts. He wants to burn a fire, but I wasn't drywood either. Be careful of playing with fire when the time comes. Deng Shintong looked at Zhang Yi seriously. "That's why you will still try to force your hand in every way possible next, but you absolutely cannot take it. He planned it thoroughly before he had to fight this battle with you to establish his authority. You, however, are unprepared, and as long as you take the move, you are already in an unfavorable situation." Zhang Yi said in his heart, "Li Changgong thinks he knows me well, so he is confident." But he would have already fallen into an unfavorable position by thinking that. "I will try my best to avoid the battle," Zhang Yi said. The crowd listened in silence, and at this point, the others could not interject, with looks of worry written on their faces. Seeing that the atmosphere was somewhat frozen, Zhang Yi suddenly laughed. All right, you guys don't need to worry. I'll take care of this issue. You guys came to Xinjiang was to come over and relax. Andy Zhou, you take the lead and lead the big guys out for a spin."